I was part of the first AI meetup here in Washington, DC. It was one of the speakers, the very first one that's last year. We're just getting started. And so, if I get a few more data points, and I'll be confident to say that, it's going to continue up like this. But right now, it really feels like it's just getting started. Some of my VC friends and angel friends are just coming to grips that they may want to put an AI company into their portfolio, So it's all just coming together now, which is not too late. We're super early in the cycle.
How does a business effectively use AI, both currently and in the near future? It's a question that Wolf Ruzicka has been pondering for some time, over 25 years to be exact. In this episode of DC Decoded, I, Sam Lee, get to chat with a seasoned technologist and serial entrepreneur. Over the course of the conversation, Wolf and I talk about his book, AI Driven, Staying Alive in the Age of Digital Darwinism, co-written with Victor Shiloh. Additionally, we talk about the exciting tech ecosystem that coexists with the policy ecosystem in DC, and why AI is not the answer to every business problem. Let's get going. Welcome back to DC Decoded, a Gen AI podcast, where we break down what happens when artificial intelligence meets the nation's capital. I'm your host, Sam Lee, part of the Gen AI DC chapter. Today, we're having a chat with Wolf Ruzicka. Wolf is a technology industry veteran with more than 25 years of experience leading enterprise business strategy and innovation. He's also the co-author of the 2024 book, which I have right here. So make sure we get it into the frame, AI Driven with Victor Shiloh. He is currently head of strategic advisory at East Bank Technologies, where he was originally CEO. He has managed the organic growth of the company, including scaling the team from 35 to more than 200 employees. And after a merger, the company now has almost 1,000 employees. Wolf is a serial entrepreneur, investor, technology advocate, and mentor. He holds an MBA from Ingolstadt School of Management. A global citizen, Wolf was born in Nuremberg, Germany, and has spent his life living, working, and traveling around the world. Today, he resides in Washington, D.C. with his two beloved rescue dogs, Roxanne and Beyonce, and the dog has just made a cameo there, Buddy. Wolf, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. Glad to be here.
Of course. So first question is, Wolf, how do you define artificial intelligence or AI?
Well, there's a lot of hype and opaqueness around it. And so I always remind everyone that in the beginning, there was a serious discussion about calling it predictions based on advanced data processing. And it just becomes really self-explanatory at that point, right? There's no more guessing what it means. You're always dealing with something that is probabilistic, a prediction of something on top of sometimes complex data that needs to be processed behind the scenes and computed, calculated so that it can feed into the statistics engine to come out with a prediction that hopefully is more often correct than not.
And how have you seen AI potentially misconstrued ever since recent developments? The one that comes to my mind is at least end of 2022, when I think it was the third model of ChatGPT came out and really kind of went into the mainstream. What is AI not? What do you see are the most common misconceptions?
So for sure, it is not intelligent. These are just statistical models that predict something. They don't think about this. They don't think. They don't have ideas on their own. They accelerate your idea. If you have writer's block and you ask for advice, then it will accelerate some of the things that you've already put into your writing, or accelerate, say, a designer that may have a concept of an illustration and can provide 100 different types of illustrations for the designer then to be able to say, great, not great, got it completely wrong. It's obviously hallucinating again. And so these are the biggest misconceptions. This morning, I read that some therapists actually tested the most current models of several of those engines for Alzheimer's and dementia. And it turned out that they could actually check that some of those have the characteristics of somebody showing dementia. So they are definitely not, the equivalent of you or me, Sam, or any of our listeners.
Wow, I did not know that. That is definitely one against the current form of AI models. You've had, I think, a fascinating and obviously long career so far with AI and data-driven businesses. Can you just share a bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today, as succinctly as you want?
Well, thanks, Sam. How much time do we have? At this point, I sit on 11 boards. I have 9 exits under my belt. I'm actively invested in 3 startup companies, and I have 2 rescue dogs. So that's the short version of, what happened to me so far in my life. I made the big mistake of studying business administration, because when you don't know what you want to do, then I guess you study business administration. Biggest waste of my time. Instead of the required 4 years, it took me 7 years to complete it because I just couldn't get over the fact that this is all common sense. Then lucky for me, just when I finished finally and got this MBA, the tech revolution had just started, the internet revolution. And I was stuck in Germany, where all we had really is SAP and a few others that pretend to be modern technology companies. And I do have friends at SAP, and they will forgive me. I know, Jason, thank you. But all the action was here in the United States. And so I literally walked out of the last test where the professor barely let me pass. Poster, we are, 100 people. We have 10 million in revenue. We will be tens of thousands of people. We'll have tens of billions in revenue. We happen to be in McLean, Virginia, outside of Washington, DC. If you're interested, send us your resume. And I had just completed my resume in English for the Japanese government where I worked. So it was really easy. I just, shoot a dart into the dark. And it popped right into the bullseye. So they called right away,
Wow.
said, can you come on over? And that's when I started, 26 years ago. I started in technology and haven't left ever since. And so I was lucky that company, MicroStrategy, dealt with one of the 3 components that make up an AI. So the first component is mathematics, that we call models. The second one is compute, that we sometimes call, hyperscalers or whatever. And the third one is the food for an AI. It's data. And so this company, MicroStrategy, focused very much on what back then was called big data. And I wanted to write a blog post at one point saying that big data is big BS. But the marketing team didn't allow me to say this. So, but now I said it in front of you, and hopefully you won't censor me.
Great. No, I work for a free speech group. We really try not to do that.
Well, then let's write that blog post together. And so, big data back then was 3 terabytes, 15 terabytes in some kind of central data repository. And then at one point, something crazy happened, and Walmart breached the magical barrier of having 100 terabytes. And we went to Bentonville. We crawled through the data center, and we're like, oh my God, that's what 100 terabytes looks like. It was unfathomable to us at the time. And so one of the last projects that we did is 25 petabytes or 52 petabytes. I always forget. But I've been part of this food journey into an AI ever since I came to the United States.
Sure. Yeah, and we'll definitely get into that. One quick follow-up is, how does a company pretend to be a modern technology company? Can you say a bit more about that?
How does what?
You said that the tech companies in Europe, some of them pretend to be a modern tech company. What do you mean by that? If you could say a bit more.
So that they're very clunky and, oftentimes, and you can generalize like this, so I apologize. But, there's some really great startups over in Europe. There's some really great tech companies in Europe. But at that time, and we're talking, beginning of the internet boom, there was no such thing as this incredible ecosystem that we had in the United States. And so I just picked one example, but typically the European companies that I encounter, again, I'm hedging a little bit. The European companies that I encounter oftentimes over-engineer, they over-architect, they don't do the John Wayne type of approach towards building technology, which is, chunk it up into fast iterations. Don't be afraid of failing. Adjust if you fail. And if you iterate and you measure at every iteration some positive change, then all you really have to focus on is keeping that positive rate of change constant. And then you create this hockey stick. If you're really great, you increase the rate of change, and then you create this vertical jump, which I've never been part of. But when you overthink it and you think too much about what might negatively impact, and it prevents you from moving fast, then that's the kind of company that I was describing. And that's what we had in Europe at the time.
Right, right. And a lot of these concepts that you're talking about have also been distilled into this book you've written with Victor. And in this book, AI Driven, you guys cover a lot of ground on how not just one type.
You even read it, Sam. Thank you.
Of course. I'm not a podcast host who would just interview somebody who wrote a book and would not read it. And you guys cover a lot of different businesses, a lot of different types of businesses and how they should think about AI. When I was listening to how you've been talking about this book, can you talk a bit about how first the book came about, what your intended purpose for it was, and what the impact has been? What has surprised you about it since putting it out last year?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, can you edit out that I'm blushing in the video? So it all started with, I truly have not just recently woken up as somebody that dabbles with AI. The first AI engine that our team built was 19 years ago. Maybe by now it's 20 years ago. I was interviewed by Chinese TV at the time when Google Go beat the reigning Go Grandmaster. That's 9-10 years ago at this point. So I've occupied my brain about the power of data plus mathematics plus sufficient compute power for a very long time. And so these publishers seem to have, read some things I said in interviews or written myself, listened to some of those podcast interviews I do. And so they called me and said, would you be interested in writing a book about AI for enterprise CXOs? CXOs is CEOs, CMOs, COOs, blah, blah, blah. And it was during lockdown. I was at my kitchen table and Buddy was there and, the rescue dog. And I said, I have nothing better to do. The company is going like a machine. Why don't I just write? And because I didn't want to just be too business oriented, but I wanted to vet it, that it is technically as sound as it possibly can be. Victor and he was the CTO at the time. Now he's the head of AI and data engineering. We paired up so that, my business acumen, if I may say so, and his technical depth and breadth really married up. That's a really tough marriage. Thank God. Victor and I worked together also for 19, 20 years at this point. So sometimes we complete each other's sentences. And sometimes I make the mistake of calling him Lucas, which is the name of my son. And sometimes I call Lucas Victor. But both of them are gracious enough to forgive me. And so we started writing. And we have full-time jobs or more than full-time jobs. And so it was very slow going in the beginning. But then when OpenAI came up with this incredible idea to put one application on top of their generative AI engine, if you will, a chat interface, and everyone became aware of it to a degree that my mom even now asks me what this is.
Yeah.
That's when we said, okay, now we've really got to push this one out. First, we double checked. Did we, does this change anything of how we think about it? And it doesn't, and it didn't, and it doesn't. So it became a timeless story of the case studies that we put together from our experience. And we hammered away at it over Christmas, Easter, every weekend here in our office in Washington, DC, after work until we finally published it. And first surprise when it came out was that we hit the number 2 category on Amazon in AI. And number 1 in the compute category on Amazon. And sorry, Barnes & Noble, that's just where I looked. And so that floored me first. And then the second thing that floored me completely was that one of the top 5 companies in one of the industries in the United States, I can't give it away, the CIO reached out on LinkedIn and said, so I listened to one of your podcasts. I saw that you wrote a book. I read the book. I want chapter 1. Can I get chapter 1 for my book, which is AI-driven digital transformation, how to prepare for AI? The following 4 chapters are simple AI, more complex to nirvana, step by step. Floored me because that's obviously a very exciting project for my team. It obviously will get my CFO really excited. The third thing that surprised me that I really didn't expect is that, again, somebody reached out. So we read the book. We have an executive I can't say who it is. They lawyered me up quite dramatically. We have an executive offsite in Singapore. And would you guys like to come on over and do the keynote speech? And that was probably in front of 800 executives of that company. I was in complete shock, I have to tell you. This was, totally unexpected. I was completely convinced they'll never want to see us again. And then they invited us to the next executive offsite in Taiwan, again in front of the executives, talking about how we think about AI. And interestingly enough, it is one of the foundational companies for AI technologies. And it looks like we really hit a nerve there.
Right.
And sorry, Sam, I'm famous for long answers to short questions. I just want to give a bit more context to your listeners.
No worries. It's beautiful the way I think you craft those stories. So I will cut you off if I feel like
Yes,
it is not working. I think that is a great response to this book. And I think one quick follow-up here is, whose idea was it to have that little like AI summary at the end of each chapter? Because I felt like that really just like completed the loop for each chapter. So was that you? Was that Victor? Who was that?
It's anytime there's a genius idea, it's Victor.
Okay, noted. So that was Victor.
Yeah. And so we even use different LLMs to really give it a feel,
right?
And something unique. So each one of the summaries is even unique. It's a different AI that summarizes the book on our behalf.
Right. And I think the book, it's concise, it gets to the point, it talks about important terms anybody who's even interested in AI should know, like the difference between structured data, unstructured data. Mm-hmm. I'll let viewers go find the book themselves and read it. But one concept that I think is worth talking a bit about is, and you have stressed this to me when we've just talked, like, it's not going to be every single time a business faces a structural problem, they should immediately use AI. Like, you've been very clear that AI is not a magic silver bullet. As somebody who did write this book and co-authored it, talk a bit about that. How can a business decide if AI is the right solution from a book that is giving so many good AI solutions?
What a great question. I think it's so important to understand it. And so the background, first of all, is AI is not, there's the saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But AI, and there's different flavors of AI. So that's why thank you for asking me to define it. When predictions are a necessity for solving a certain problem, then one of the flavors of AI is most likely a great hammer for that nail. But the other day in a company, with 5,000 people, it's a financial company, pretty large, and they wanted to use generative AI to fix a broken process. Now, a business process is typically a deterministic, flow. You can predict when task number 1 is done, it should go to number 2, and then it should go to number 3 and 4 in parallel, come together in step number 6, and so on. So this is quite basic, mathematics. And the process was broken. So it may have routed, the completion of task number 1 to task number 3, and then to task number 2. And so they wanted to use generative AI to fix that broken process instead of just fixing the broken process, right? So why is this important? It could have fixed it, but GenAI particularly is not a cheap technology, even though what we heard from DeepSeek, which may or may not be true. And even if it is not as cheap as proper deterministic technology. And I'll give you an example. I know this from all the hyperscalers, and it may even be public knowledge. If they just added generative AI to 5% of their existing workflows in Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, let's be nice and say Oracle Cloud, and then they would have to double the number of global data centers just with 5% workloads. And so imagine if we overdid the GenAI usage incorrectly for tasks or processes that don't deserve generative AI. The ROI is just immediately gets evaporated.
Right.
And so on average, when I talk to these executive leadership outings and board meetings and things like that, and they present me with potential use cases that they had been thinking about, on average, I eliminate 75% of them. There are easier ways to solve them, but a quarter of them are extremely powerful to be solved by generative AI. And that means it can be intellectual property for them. It can be alternative revenue streams for them. It can be extreme cost savings for them, and so on.
Right, exactly. So it's really still about picking your targets. Even though AI is quite different as a technology from previous technologies, it's still operating in the context of businesses which are made up of humans who need to make those strategic decisions. So
Right.
it's a very important point, and again, one that I think you and Victor do a great job of articulating. I have one more question for the book for now, and then we can move on to more DC specific topics. But one of the big concerns with AI and generative AI specifically is hallucinations. I would say across the board, people have concerns about that. So two things. First, define that term for people who might not be as familiar. And second, how do you think businesses should handle this risk currently with where AI models currently are?
Yeah. So anytime you predict something, maybe you watched the movie Oppenheimer, and you may have come across this Danish scientist there called Niels Bohr. Mm-hmm. Niels Bohr said something absolutely fantastic, and it should stick to everyone's brain as they think about probabilistic technologies. Predictions are hard, especially when they involve the future. So that implies that when you predict something, there is a probability that you will get this wrong. That is what we call a hallucination. Famous examples in ChatGPT, they fixed it by now. How many R's are in the word strawberry? And it just said 3 or 4 or 5. These are all hallucinations where it predicts. It doesn't count. Now they may have put a deterministic mathematical formula into their probabilistic technology that then simply counts the R's and gets it therefore right. And so these models will become better and better at preventing hallucinations, but they're a feature. They're not a bug. They will always be there. And when you catch, one of those generative AIs, I'm not just talking about chatbots. I'm really talking about the underlying platform on top of which chat is just one application. I think it's another important part to keep in mind that there's multiple applications where the real money is for companies and for engineers to think through what other types of applications on top might be worthwhile exploring. That's really where I think the next startup ecosystem should focus. And so these generative AI platforms underneath it are probabilistic and will therefore get something wrong. It's just the nature of the beast. And so when you come at them from left field, just like the Indian Prime Minister just the other day highlighted, ask any of them today, maybe they'll fix it, to generate images of left-handed writers that hold the pen in the left hand. They can't do it because the training data has not accounted for it. And therefore, all the images that come back to this very day from DeepSeek or whoever, generates images will have right-handed writers instead of left-handed ones. So how do businesses deal with it? It's Victor wrote a really fantastic post for Forbes the other day where he's pointing towards, and we don't know, but he's pointing towards the next generation after RAG architectures. And RAG architectures are retrieval augmented generation architectures that take into account what the business, so let's stay in the enterprise, what the business's data can verify as correct to prevent the hallucination from emerging. It's not a 100% correct, method, but it helps enterprises more often than not in most of the cases to make sure that the hallucinations don't completely go bonkers and take the context of the organization in mind.
Right. Let's move on to the state of AI in DC. So we both live in DC right now, and there's a lot happening in regards to not just AI policy, but AI in general. What are key developments you're tracking in terms of AI in DC?
So it's not unusual in comparison to the other hotbeds, but we have a benefit here. So first of all, we're a very large metropolitan area. 10% of the GDP of the United States is generated here outside of the federal government, not taking the federal government into account. So we have a huge business community here. And then we have the federal government, and then we have all these nonprofits, and then we have the lawmakers here. And we have a fantastic startup community. So I was even just talking yesterday to a data scientist, machine learning engineer, and gifted mathematician. And the statement was that Washington, DC, in comparison to all the other ones, has some factors that nobody else has. And that provides for a very unique ecosystem. You and I have been part of the GenAI collective, which is now in its third month. Happy birthday, Catherine. It's fantastic that we are able to bring this together and provide not just Silicon Valley hype. We have that, and that we not just bring policymakers together. We have that, and that we cannot just bring business leaders together like in New York City. We have that too. That's what I think is super, super unique here.
And this ecosystem you've talked about, I think it's still a new concept, especially for people who don't live here, or even people who do and are not fully aware of it. So when did this happen? Like if somebody asked you that, how would you paint the scale of change here? When was this all coming together?
I would have to look up when I was asked by Tom Weithman to join the investment board of Virginia Investment Partners. That's a long time ago. Virginia had always tried to build a startup ecosystem in Virginia. It just so happens that the magnet of this entire region is in Washington, D.C. So this Virginia Investment Partner organization ended up being placed in Northern Virginia. And we regularly pump very good seed fund capital into the startup economy, at least in Virginia, not just exclusively in Northern Virginia. And that has really blossomed. And I think it also then toppled over across the Potomac River into Washington, D.C. and across the Potomac River into Southern Maryland, at least. So there, I don't think, and I also don't know whether this was the ignition of it all, but it was certainly one of the factors, and it was not the only one. And I saw it with my own eyes, how this triggered accelerators, incubators to just blossom up all over Washington, D.C. or the metro Washington, D.C. area.
That sounds like a very good trend to be happening in the area. And where do you see that going in the next, say, 5 years with this growth happening across startups, accelerators? What would be the ideal scenario, let's say, in 5 years' time?
So in 5 years' time, I don't, predictions are hard, especially when they involve the future.
Right. To the best of your ability.
Yeah. So, these technology trends typically come in S-curves. And I cannot see the flattening of the S yet. So this is really, it continues to accelerate. Here, if we're just talking locally, I think the community has just woken up and is just getting ready. And I think we can see it in the events that both of us attend, where they started small. A few years ago, they were not focused on AI. I was part of the first AI meetup here in Washington, D.C. It was one of the speakers, the very first one. That's last year. We're just getting started. And so, if I get a few more data points, and I'll be confident to say that, it's going to continue up like this. But right now, it really feels like it's just getting started. Some of my VC friends and angel friends are just coming to grips that they may want to put an AI company into their portfolio, So it's all just coming together now, which is not too late. We're super early in the cycle.
Right. Let's talk about policy for a second. It seems that our lawmakers are usually behind the curve when talking about not just AI, but technology in general. I think especially among younger generations growing up in the age where you could see congressional hearings as clips on TikTok or Instagram, you routinely see these quite old lawmakers asking quite inane questions towards tech CEOs. This is a concept. This is not targeting anybody or any specific age. But with that perception, I think that policymakers have not shaken off yet. What is the most important misconception about AI and the way to go about AI policy that you think policymakers need to correct or refine their understanding of? How can they get better at understanding what policies would be best for AI growth in the US?
Well, I was lucky that I hosted the Summer of AI in DC end of last year. So I was lucky that some people from the White House, some people from Congress showed up. And so the good news is they were super curious. They were not just coming into the room with, looking for the best possible objection, but really open-minded. So that's very encouraging. And then at the same time, I think they have to insert themselves into the community. Don't do it in isolation. Talk with people like you, with Catherine, with me, with the others in the GenAI community. We have so many AI companies here or data companies here in Washington, D.C. Get out onto the street, talk with Matt at Appian, talk with Mike Saylor at MicroStrategy, talk to, Sid Banerjee or others that have been working in this probabilistic technology field for a very long time. We all have gray hair at this point, and learn from us. It doesn't mean that, you have to then follow what we say, because I don't know how to, create a good policy, but at least educate yourself, not in isolation, but in conversations with people like you and me. And then always remember that AI, as I said it before, is composed, if you're abstract enough, an AI is composed of three components. It's compute power, it's the laws of mathematics, and it's data. So what do you want to regulate? Do you want to regulate the laws of mathematics? That makes no sense to me, right? Do you want to regulate the speed at which computers can process data? That also doesn't make any sense to me. So the only factor left that we might want to attach ourselves to is the food of an AI, which is data. And there, I don't know what a regulation might look like, but for sure it should center around the training data, and it should center around the data that an AI receives from the end users, which is controlled by the interface. So a good UI creates great AI. So maybe it's around user interface design regulations as we regulate traffic signs. I don't know, but that's where I would start digging a little bit if I were them.
Right. One topic that I think is relevant to both public sector actors and private sector actors is AI's environmental impact and its energy intensive nature. I mean, you were already talking about that very early on in the conversation. So from your perspective, how should both public and private sector actors be thinking about sustainability in AI, especially as both the consumption AI uses and the consumption for AI continues to grow?
It's hard to say. It is absolutely easy to foreshadow that we will run out of energy. And I'm not an energy expert, but I do believe that this is where we need a revolution to happen. And maybe Microsoft is onto something with the micro nuclear power plants. Maybe there's some other solutions for it, but I'm the wrong person to say it or to give any kind of advice about it. The only thing I know is these energies are very energy intensive, which is why I warn against using them broadly, not only because they're the wrong hammer for that type of nail, but also because they really are energy intensive technologies to use.
Right. Two more questions for you. First, I really like this quote from your book, and I wanted to read it to you and get the additional thoughts here. But this comes near the end of the book, and it states, "We live in an age where the digital asteroid has struck. Its fireball is spreading at internet speed, devouring one previously unbeatable deterministic T-Rex after another, one prehistoric species after another. However, some not only survive the onslaught, but thrive without resorting to luck, magic, or hope. The evolution of deterministic dinosaurs to probabilistic mammals has begun." Can you elaborate on what you are trying to get here? Because I think it is quite profound.
So, we as a company work with some of the largest companies in the world. We also work with some startups. So that's by design. Bring the nimbleness of the new mammals up to the dinosaurs so that they become, as nimble, hopefully, as the mammals, and bring the safety and stability and robustness of a dinosaur to one of the young companies as early as possible. I'll give you a war story. I met the CIO of a publicly traded company probably a year ago, and I said, and I'm not going to name the name, but privately I'll tell you who it is so you can check that I didn't just make this up. I told her that you will have to become an AI company that happens to sell clothes online and in stores. I don't know what that means, was the reply. Let's get started. And so as we build out the first pipeline of AI features to insert into that company's processes, I called one of my friends, Tom. Some people have said he's the #1 patent attorney in the United States for this type of stuff. I said, Tom, I have a feeling that there is a patent in here somewhere, because we're talking about greenfield developments, right? This is so new that so many things still have to be developed and will be developed. And he's like, Wolf, are you crazy? One patent? There's at least 6 patents in this. So I went back to the CIO, and I had met other leaders in the company as well by that time. And I said, you're sitting on 6 potential patents here. So what does that then mean? It means that either you have a competitive moat, meaning that somebody in your industry will have to license this software or this capability from you at $1 million a year, $10 million a year. I don't know. but that's an alternative revenue stream that you didn't have before, that you wouldn't have been able to get to. Or you can just hoard it and use it as a defense mechanism so that nobody can reach that level of AI capability as you will reach. And she said, you know what? Now I know what you mean by I have to really start becoming an AI company that happens to sell stores online, clothes online and in stores. This is true for every one of those companies, every one of them. It goes to NASDAQ. You have to become an AI company that helps people trade stocks more predictably. It goes to banks. It goes to car manufacturers and on it goes. And therefore, it also goes to, when I talk about the species, it goes towards entire industries. We may see the emergence of new industries that have not existed before, and we may see the destruction of industries because of these technologies. It truly is the third transformational event in human history. I absolutely believe it. Agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, AI revolution. This will be one of the outcomes of it, the destruction and rebirth of industries and enterprises like this.
Right. The last question we normally ask is what you think makes the developments around AI in DC unique compared to other places, but you've pretty much answered that. So we're not going to ask you that. And for listeners, please just go back 10 minutes and listen to Wolf's answer if you're curious or missed it. So instead, in lieu of that, I will ask, and on the theme of our predictions, not really knowing if they'll be true or not, what is your boldest prediction for AI in 2025?
Well, it's been said before, and I do believe it, that, we will, and also, first of all, what most of the companies, most of the organizations, most of the governments, you name it, are struggling with is how do you go from experiments around traditional AI and generative AI on top of structured data, AI on top of unstructured data? How do you move that into meaningful production systems? So many of them are stuck in this continuous AI experimentation, and that's all just luxurious research. Leave it up to the scientists and the researchers. You have to find a way to move these things at scale across the AI chasm from experimental labs, little POCs here or there, into truly AI-ifying the workloads in production that are where this technology is applicable and can make you money, save lives. So that's number one. This has to happen this year. Otherwise, we're just going to lose too much momentum. So we're actively working on that as a company. We try to find these organizations that are paralyzed by too much analysis and just get going, not AI by PowerPoint, but AI in front of real users at scale. This has to happen. It is starting to happen, at least in my little world. And then we will see for sure, I'm not the first one to say it, the emergence of agentic systems that, combine the capabilities into something more independent, which I think is extremely exciting because it will free up humans from having to do the mundane things that we still to this very day do too much of. And I do hope that we will see many more killer apps, not just a chatbot on top of a generative AI engine, but many, many other apps. And so Victor and I, when we do our executive TED Talk, we show what we call the Superman slide. And on top of the end are the end users, and at the bottom is foundational mathematics. And then you have the layers that come to the platforms, like an OpenAI or many others. But then there is this gap between the platforms and the actual end consumers. And that's where we still have very few applications and AI systems. And we need an extreme focus on this. And I think we have that focus now, at least based on the comments that I hear from our DC-based, GenAI community. There's a lot of ideas in that layer where most of the money is yet to be made.
Right. Let me plug your book one more time for listeners and watchers. It's AI Driven by Wolf Ruzicka and Victor Shiloh. Wolf, thank you again for coming on the show. And this was great. It was great to learn a bit more about you, the book, your thoughts on AI in DC, and just thanks again for your time.
Of course. Thank you, Sam.
That's a wrap for this episode of DC Decoded. I want to thank Wolf again for his time. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to DC Decoded on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And if you found this discussion valuable, we'd love it if you left a rating or a review. It really helps others discover our show. For more on the DC chapter of the GenAI Collective, upcoming events, and ways to get involved, check out the links in the show description. If you're interested in collaborating, sponsoring, or just learning more, don't hesitate to reach out via the information in the show description. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in 2 Wednesdays for the next episode.